Hello, and welcome to PD Insider. My name is Craig Miller of PLI. This program is part of a series for the PD community to share insights about professional development and the law. Joining me today is Jordana Confino. Jordana is a certified professional coach, speaker, and advisor known for her expertise in positive psychology. 7 years after graduating from Yale Law School, Jordana founded her own firm, JC Coaching and Consulting. She's an adjunct professor of law at Fordham Law School and was voted Adjunct Professor of the Year in 2021. Jordana presents a bite-sized learning series on positive lawyering on PLI.edu. Previously, Jordana clerked for the Honorable Robert D. Sack of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit and for the Honorable Paul Engelmeyer of the Southern District of New York. The focus of today's conversation is what can lawyers do to reach their highest potential and build meaningful, satisfying careers through positive lawyering. Thank you for being here today, Jordana.
Oh, I'm delighted. Thank you for having me.
Let me start off by asking, so you've been hosting a series of bite-sized learning programs for PLI on the subject of positive lawyering. So where does your emphasis on that come from?
It comes very much from my own experience. So when I was in law school and starting out in my career, I did basically the opposite of positive lawyering. So at that point, there's no better way of describing me than basically being a raging overachiever and believing that any focus on cultivating my well-being was going to hold me back from being as successful as I could. And so there was really no room for well-being in my life at that point. And it seemed to work initially, and then it pretty quickly stopped working, and I burned out very, very hard, you might say, and just hit my breaking point. And I was so unhappy, and I was also experiencing all of the physical manifestations of that as well. And I discovered positive psychology for the very first time, literally Googling how to be happy when I was a burnt out lawyer. And I discovered that there was this thing called positive psychology. I had been a psychology major. I didn't know about it. And it was the scientific study of what makes people and organizations flourish. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to know this. So I enrolled in this extensive certification training program on positive psychology purely for my own edification at that point. I just wanted to know how to be happy. And I was the only lawyer in the program. And I get to the end of it and I'm just like, oh my goodness, this is the most transformative thing I've ever done. And my whole experience in both law school and practice would have been infinitely better if I had known this stuff then. And I'm pretty sure that 99% of the lawyers and law students I've ever met are just as clueless as I've been. And so as my capstone project in that course, I made a syllabus on positive lawyering, which is positive psychology, tailored specifically for members of the legal profession, because I knew that lawyers weren't going to pay attention to this stuff unless it was designed specifically for them, because I wouldn't have paid attention when I needed it most until I hit my breaking point. And it was at that point that I really realized, like, this is what I meant. This is what this was all for. This is what I meant to do, is bringing this to other lawyers and law students.
Wow, that's really an intense story. I mean, actually being at the point to Google how to be happy is amazing. The legal industry itself has made supporting lawyers' wellness an issue, a public mission really, since the Hazelton study that came out around 2019. So as you did this work, what gaps did you notice in the legal profession that you were hoping to address?
Positive psychology, you can think of it as, whereas traditional psychology focuses on treating depression, treating anxiety, treating substance use challenges, and bringing people back to neutral or okay. Positive psychology asks, how can we bring people from neutral or okay to flourishing or experiencing the greatest possible satisfaction and fulfillment? And so at the time that I started doing this work, no one was really yet focusing on that. So they were focusing on how can we treat the problems, but not how can we take lawyers who are doing okay or languishing or doing fine and actually help them proactively cultivate these positive feelings of satisfaction and fulfillment. And why is that worth doing? Because that's how they can get the edge on their performance and really be the highest possible performers, as opposed to surviving and not breaking like I effectively did.
Right. Wow, that's intense. But, part of the lawyer personality is skepticism.
Yep.
And, people talk about the lawyer brain or even thinking like a lawyer, which is always about looking for pitfalls and looking for, trapdoors and negative things that could potentially happen. So did you encounter skepticism in the legal profession about the concept of positive lawyering?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. In fact, I presented that syllabus to a number of different institutions that have since embraced it and was laughed out of the room for a number of years. And even still, and a lot of lawyers hear well-being or positive lawyering, they think like, oh, that's fluffy woo nonsense. That's going to make us less effective or be a distraction to us from getting our work done. And so there was lots of skepticism at first. There's still some skepticism, but what I love about positive psychology, what I think has made the work so effective, is that it is all grounded in science. And so you can laugh at the idea that well-being is worth focusing on from a professional standpoint. But then if I show you studies literally demonstrating on a neurochemical level how experiencing various forms of positive emotions or positive connection or a feeling of meaning and purpose changes our brain chemistry in a way that empowers us to perform at a higher level, or literally increases our stress resilience in a way that empowers us to more effectively handle all of the challenges that come our way, then maybe you will pay attention. And so I've really gone to science to help combat some of that skepticism, and also acknowledging the skepticism though, because I think that if you don't accept that it's there and plan for it and really address it intentionally head on, you're not going to get much traction.
So that's the key, really drawing the connection between well-being and professional performance.
Yes, because what I realized when I was doing my positive psychology training was that I would not, when I needed it most, I would not have gone to learn about how to do something that would make me happier or healthier, because I didn't care about being happy or healthy. I just wanted to be effective and successful. And so if you can draw the link between even if you don't care about being happy or healthy, or even if you don't care about your lawyers or your employees being happy or healthy, if you care about performance, if you care about the best possible client service, if you care about, the highest return on investment, focus for that reason, because the science shows that these things are directly linked, and that cultivating the well-being will actually fuel performance and longevity, and that neglecting it is going to have really negative effects on those other things as well.
Can you provide some examples of when well-being impacted professional performance, either negatively or positively?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the one that is easiest for people to understand, and which I don't want to focus on too much here, but I'll just touch on it, is like basic hierarchy of needs. So sleep. Sleep is a biological necessity, not a luxury. And if we're not getting enough of it, it takes such a dramatic toll on our cognitive performance. And so there are really alarming studies showing that being chronically sleep deprived gives you a level of cognitive impairment that's equivalent to legal intoxication. And that level of sleep deprivation, I will say 6 hours per night for 2 weeks, equivalent to legal intoxication. Think about how many lawyers are only getting 6 hours of sleep per night. And also the scariest part is that the studies show that we acclimate to our lower level of functioning, so that we think that we're performing just fine, but we don't realize how much better we could be performing. And so that's just a very basic thing. But even putting that aside, the studies show that when we have positive emotions, which I think so many lawyers would dismiss as being like frivolous or a trivial distraction, a waste of time, it's something called the broaden and build theory of positive emotions. It broadens our cognitive awareness when we experience positive emotions in a way that makes us more creative and open-minded and better problem solvers. And so just to give you one example of a study that showed this, students who were asked to reflect on one of the happiest experiences of their life before taking a math test significantly outperformed their peers after controlling for the other variables. And one more example, doctors were 20% faster and more accurate at diagnosing complicated patients when they're primed to feel happiness by being given a small bag of candy, which is ridiculous. But also you wonder what type of candy it is. But actually experiencing these even fleeting moments of joy or connection changes our brain chemistry in ways that make us perform better. So that's just one nugget. But then even on the one study that I recently conducted in partnership with Now on perfectionism, which is often thought of, if it's thought of at all, it's thought of as a well-being issue. And we can talk more about that later. In the study measuring perfectionism, specifically among lawyers in private practice, we found that not only is it linked with higher levels of depression and extreme stress and workaholism, which are well-being issues, also linked with shorter longevity in their jobs, greater intention to quit, and greater aversion to both giving and receiving feedback, greater difficulty managing workload. The list goes on. And that, a well-being issue, directly tied to the performance. And so we're seeing these things are really inextricably intertwined, and that rather than the well-being and taking time for well-being related things undercutting professional performance, it's actually the opposite of that.
But you mentioned perfectionism at one
Yes.
point too. So what are some of the common signs of sort of maladaptive perfectionism in legal practice? And thinking about our audience, what can PDs do to proactively spot and address them?
Well, let's get clear on when I say perfectionism, as you alluded to, I'm referring to maladaptive perfectionism. And what is that not? Because I think a lot of skeptical lawyers or PD professionals will turn this off the second that they hear that Jordana is against perfectionism, because they're like, oh, well, we need that. Like, that's what gives us excellent work and client service and the like. Perfectionism is not doing everything perfectly. It is not having high drive and determination and meticulous attention to detail or commitment to excellence. All of those qualities are fabulous and will make you an effective lawyer. And I don't want anyone to get rid of those. Perfectionism, maladaptive perfectionism at its core is really this deep-rooted fear and shame-based motivation where you're striving for perfection, not because of this intrinsic values-based motivation because you want to produce something excellent, but because you're terrified that you're not good enough, you're terrified of failure, and you're running away from the shame that you think will happen if you make some sort of mistake. And the reason this is so problematic is because it keeps lawyers operating in a very fixed mindset where they never are open to challenging themselves or taking steps that will enable them to learn and grow and maximize their capabilities because they're so scared of making a mistake. So that prevents growth and development. It's also terrible for time management issues because perfectionism, maladaptive perfectionism, is really linked with procrastination or perfectionist paralysis because we're so terrified of not doing something absolutely perfectly that we'll worry about it for hours before actually getting started on it, or read the same sentence or the same email 100 times when we don't actually have time to do that, which is why it's tied to the finding I mentioned of difficulty prioritizing and managing our workloads that was shown in the recent study I did. It also really impedes professional development or business development because when you move up the ranks from just being a junior associate worker bee to wanting to generate some sort of additive, unique value, especially as you're rising towards partnership, that requires creativity and courage to be able to step outside your comfort zone. And perfectionists do not want to step outside their comfort zones. Also, very much leads to burnout and overextension because perfectionists feel like they can never say no because they have to be perfect by always saying yes and then somehow just make everything happen, even though they have a finite amount of time and energy. They may not like that fact, but they do, but they reject that reality and instead say, somehow I must make everything work and I must make everything work perfectly, even if that's impossible. And what that prevents them from doing is planning for obstacles that inevitably arise, and also making intentional trade-offs with their time and their energy, which is necessary for anyone who has more on their plate than they can, manage absolutely perfectly, which is basically everybody in the legal profession. And so Perfectionism can really manifest as these time and project management issues and these professional development, these business development issues. And often it's not viewed as a perfectionism problem. It's viewed as, oh, this person has a time management problem. We need to give them some time management tools. Or, oh, this person needs some instruction on how to start developing business or taking these other big steps. But if we're not treating it the root source, which is the perfectionism and the fear itself, perfectionists will never really be able to execute on any of those other tasks effectively.
So that's really brilliant because it's often misidentified.
Yes.
And if the root cause is time management or something else, which often has sort of off-the-shelf recommendations for it, but that's a little bit stickier or more difficult to address maladaptive perfectionism. Have you seen ways to overcome it, to coach people so that they can address those issues and do better?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll say, going back to my own coach who I mentioned years ago, I'm living proof that this is possible, which is what inspired me to do it for others. Like I said, lawyers are good learners. That's the hope that we have. And because of something called neuroplasticity, which is a phenomenon whereby we can literally rewire our brains through deliberate exposure and practice, we are capable of rewiring our brains in a way to not have those fear and shame-based perfectionist thoughts in control. It takes effort and practice, but it is possible. Even for those of us who think that we're lost causes because our perfectionism is so off the charts. And there's really, I'd say, a 3-part antidote to maladaptive perfectionism: cultivating self-compassion, cultivating growth mindset, and then cultivating a sense of values-based motivation. And so just briefly on each of them, the self-compassion is really designed to start taking the power back from that raging inner critic in our head who's trying to basically blame and shame us into peak performance by tearing us to shreds on a regular basis, telling us we're not good enough and we're going to make a mistake if we don't work hard enough. So we better work harder. And then when something's not absolutely perfect, beating us up as a way of trying to bludgeon that memory into our minds so we don't make the mistake again. And a lot of people think that inner critics are the best way to motivate us. And again, here's where the research is so powerful. That could not be farther from the truth. And so there is a ton of research showing that self-criticism actually, what it does, and I'll give you just a little neuroscience lesson here, because I think that any lawyer or any skeptical person listening is going to be like, this is not true. Self-compassion is woo nonsense, which is a normal response. When we dole out harsh self-criticism, brain imaging studies show that it causes the amygdala in our brain, which is the part of our brain that governs emotional reactivity, to become so inflamed that it consumes all of the brain's processing power and effectively turns off our prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that governs rational thought, sending us into amygdala hijacking mode, whereby we become so consumed by our emotional reactivity and our shame and our anxiety that we are not capable of thinking rationally. So when we are beating ourselves up, this is what we're doing to ourselves. We're literally preventing ourselves from being able to think on a rational level. By contrast, if we treat ourselves with self-compassion, so if we, just most simplistic way of putting this, if we show the same encouragement to ourselves that we would to a dear friend, rather than just tearing ourselves apart, it will settle our nervous system and enable our rational thinking brain to stay online and actually empower us to strategically look at the situation and determine how we can improve. And studies show that self-compassion is linked with heightened motivation, growth, and performance in a whole realm of areas. So that is number one, just practicing learning how to notice our self-criticism when it's coming up and to start replacing it with more encouraging commentary, trusting that neuroplasticity is on our side. So if we practice doing this, even when we don't believe those self-compassionate thoughts one iota yet, it will slowly change our inner monologue and how we relate with ourselves. The second thing is growth mindset. And this is just learning how to view mistakes and failures as learning opportunities rather than cataclysmic disasters that are going to ruin us. And so just pausing to look for, okay, that didn't go the way that I wanted, but what can I learn from this so that I can do better next time? That's the growth mindset one. Happy to talk more about that. And the last one is just the values-based motivation. So as I said, perfectionists are really operating from this fear or shame-based motivation. They're not running towards anything. They're just running away from not feeling good enough. And I like to say they're not really playing to win. They're just playing not to lose. And that's actually a really crummy form of motivation, and definitely not one that lasts over the long term. So if you can learn how to instead identify what your core values are, whatever they are, and then harness those values as your motivation for producing the highest quality work, that will help you tap into a sense of intrinsic meaning and purpose, which the research shows produces such a powerful form of motivation that will enable you to perform optimally both immediately and much more sustainably over the long term. So that's a long-winded way of saying 3 things to combat perfectionism.
No, that's great. And that's the kind of information that people need so that they know there are ways to address these issues, which they may not have been aware of at all.
Yeah.
Similarly, though, if someone actually does, let's say, recognize they're having a problem, and they do speak to someone at the firm, or they choose to, they can confide or talk to the professional development person or somebody who's responsible for well-being at the firm, how do those people avoid stigmatizing the vulnerability that one had to be willing to, take on in order to reveal or to ask the question or to discuss something like that? Because that typically hasn't been something that will get you to the top in a highly competitive law firm space.
Well, I think celebrating it and supporting it, right? So often coaching is a wonderful mode of support for all of these things that were being discussed. And I think that sometimes it goes in both directions because I think a lot of lawyers, if they're assigned a coach or offered a coach, they think it's remedial when actually it is such an amazing form of support. And so I think that thanking people for coming forward with these things, emphasizing that it is viewed as a sign of wisdom rather than a sign of weakness coming forward when you're struggling, and then providing resources and support. And I think that another thing that firms can do in general is modeling these things by really championing people who share their struggles and how they overcome them and how they work through them, and really showcasing how the firm is available to provide resources for people to work on these issues and through these issues and move forwards from them. Because I think if people see all of these people above me who I admire and respect also struggle with these things because these are really common challenges, and they were able to get support. They weren't thrown out when they came forward with them, and they were able to make progress on them. That's how we start changing the dynamic from one where this is stigmatized to one where this is celebrated, when people take ownership of saying, yes, I'm struggling in this way, and I would love to get this support to help me rise to another level.
Can you really get sort of success stories out?
So what I will say is increasingly, yes. And I think it is so powerful for people to share their stories. And that's one of the reasons that I'll share my story with anyone who will listen, because honestly, I'm proud of all the steps that I took. And we are now seeing out there partners, lawyers, judges, other people that are willing to share their stories openly on a broader scale. Another, I think, much more realistic and easier way is in mentorship programs. So I do one of the courses that I teach at Fordham is peer mentoring and leadership. And so I also do trainings at firms about how to build meaningful mentorship programs and how to facilitate meaningful mentoring relationships. And what I always tell the mentors is the most powerful form of support that you can give your mentees is sharing about the struggles that you've encountered along the way and how you felt when you were going through them, and ultimately how you got to where you are now, just to normalize these struggles, because everybody has had them. And I think that a lot of partners and leaders think that the best way to inspire others is by projecting this perfect image of what they can try to become one day. But the truth is that the most inspiring, empowering thing for a mentee to hear is that their mentor struggled when they were in their shoes, and that they worked through it. And that is what is going to embolden more junior people to be willing to give voice to their struggles as well.
So that's important. So being able to share stories from people across the organization. Yeah. A lot of times we think about wellness being focused on the newer attorneys because the senior attorneys, the partners, in effect have sort of made it and maybe conquered their issues, or maybe not, right? So, I mean, can we talk about how the focus on well-being can serve lawyers at all stages in their professional career development?
Absolutely. And there's greater stigma and there's less understanding of the importance of well-being as a professional competency among lawyers at higher levels, and a less understanding of the human-based aspects of motivating others, of motivating yourself. And so I think that well-being is so important to be teaching at every stage. And for the senior lawyers, they need it not only for themselves, but also because that's what makes you an effective leader. And so if you want to have a thriving team as well as being thriving yourself, it's really important to be teaching these things at the higher levels. And also, you can teach junior lawyers how to cultivate their well-being and how to fortify themselves against the stresses and challenges of their environment. But if we're not doing a top-down approach as well, where we're actually changing the workplace dynamics in a way that's it's set up for them to really flourish, they're always going to be going up against that. And it's one thing to say, okay, well, I'm going to cultivate growth mindset among the more junior members of my team. But if I'm modeling fixed mindset and I'm modeling ruthless self-criticism when it comes to myself, they're never really going to have that psychological safety to practice those things themselves. And so I think that this is just as necessary for the summer associate as it is for the senior partner and everywhere in between. And let's also not forget about the legal support staff themselves and business professionals and law firms who are making the whole place run. I really think that anyone who's walking in the door of the legal profession would benefit from this. And it should be taught in law schools, and it should be an elemental aspect of really all of the offerings at firms.
And so what is the role of the PD in well-being initiatives, and what is the perspective that they can bring?
Yeah, PD professionals play such an important role in this because well-being related competencies are core professional development related competencies. And as long as they're being viewed as something separate and siloed in the well-being and well-being alone bucket, they're never going to be elevated to the level of importance and legitimacy that they need to be in order for lawyers to be as effective as they possibly can. And so I think for PD professionals, recognizing that these should be incorporated into the core skills and competencies that are embedded in the trainings and factored into the performance evaluations and really treated as equivalent to these technical professional development skills all along the way. Often also, PD professionals will be the front lines people that have access to the associates or the partners, really the attorneys in general, and are hearing, is there a practice management issue? Are they having challenges in these various ways? Because as we discussed, often these professional challenges are linked to these more personal related factors. And so I think they can be on the front lines, seeing the issues and helping direct lawyers to modes of support, but then also embedding them into the fabric of the professional development curriculum as well.
So how can firms measure and reward, positive lawyering behaviors, alongside the more traditional performance metrics that they're accustomed to looking at?
So it's tricky because a lot of this feels very qualitative at first. And so I think that when you're looking at qualitative reviews of, let's think about how can we champion leaders who are doing this. When we look at the performance feedback evaluations in terms of what are the members of their teams saying about them and the environment of the team in terms of how they're feeling like they're being set up to succeed or not, that can really speak to what the leaders are doing in terms of creating a dynamic of psychological safety and motivating their team members in a positive way. Also for the individuals, we can look at retention. Well-being is very much linked to longevity of lawyers at firms. We saw this in the perfectionism study, direct link between longevity and maladaptive perfectionism, greater intention to quit among lawyers who are high in perfectionism. We can also actually measure satisfaction and indicators of stress and depression, but also we can look at how this is showing up in these other professional development metrics. So as I mentioned, time management, ability managing workload, openness to feedback, willingness to undertake challenges. A lot of these things are actually tied to well-being. And so we can measure these other metrics as well as kind of indicators of where there might be an issue.
Right. And that's great advice. What do you see as, what's next? What's on the horizon with the well-being movement as it's developed and continues to develop into the future in law firms, and especially as it's being sort of handled to some extent by the professional development teams within the firms?
Yeah, I see it just continuing to be elevated. I really think that the future of law is the artificial intelligence, and the technology is increasing, which is going to make the human side of lawyering even more important, because the things that the bots can't do from us really come from this positive lawyering related stuff. And so I think this being elevated, being taken more seriously and legitimately by everybody as an essential element of professional development training, as opposed to this separate well-being thing, that's really where I see the future is. And I also think that getting more lawyer-specific data on it is going to be really important to make a case to firms for why they should be investing so heavily in it, because there's tons of research outside of lawyers on how powerful cultivating well-being is for professional performance and how harmful well-being challenges are for professional performance. But a lot of the impetus behind the lawyer perfectionism study I did was, if we want lawyers to pay attention, we need to give them lawyer-specific data. So we're starting to work on that as well. And I believe that once we start measuring the data in terms of the impact, we're really going to see even more buy-in going forward. And I think that that's going to be a really good thing for the whole profession on both a personal and a professional level.
So the more hard data we look at, the more regard we may have for the soft skills that we talk about.
Exactly.
I'd like to thank my guest, Jordana Confino, adjunct professor at Fordham Law School and founder of JC Coaching and Consulting. To learn more, check out The Well-Rounded Lawyer, PLI's bite-sized anthology series featuring Jordana on positive lawyering. We look forward to you joining us for another edition of PLI's PD Insider. This is Craig Miller. Thank you, be well, and do great things.